I think what lots of non-scientists don't understand about science is that science communication isn't part of science. Science communication is science. If you do a piece of research and don't tell anybody, there's no point in having done it. And there are famous examples of that. Everybody's heard of Fermat's last theorem, where he had apparently this extraordinary mathematical insight, but he never wrote it down, he never told anybody, and then he died. So he may just as well have never done it. And so I don't think there's really any difference between science communication between scientists and popular science communication. It's a kind of a fuzzy boundary that's drawn. And one of the odd things about science publishing as it's developed is actually, unlike people who publish novels, let's say, or people who publish lots of non-fiction, an awful lot of science publishers historically have been interested in blocking publication or making it expensive and difficult, which is bizarre. Why should that be? Why should they be allowed to get away with it? And I think now at last they're not being allowed to get away with it. The other thing, of course, about science is that actually it can be pretty expensive. And in the end, who pays for it? Well, the public pays for it. And it's always struck me as very bizarre that once the public's paid for it, the people who make money out of telling the public are the publishers. And it can be astonishingly expensive to publish one's results in a commercial journal. So I think the notion somehow that scientists are in an ivory tower on some kind of peak and that the public should be kept away with expensive barriers, if it ever made any sense, certainly doesn't make any sense today. In my field, which is evolution, the greatest scientist of all, of course, was Charles Darwin. And I would say that, wouldn't I? But many people don't realize the extraordinary breadth of the things he did. He wrote a book about earthworms. He wrote a book about facial expressions. He wrote a book about self-fertilization in flowers. And how could he do that? He could do that only by writing to the then rather small community of European scientists and exchanging ideas with them. And actually what made Darwin was cross-fertilization. If you read The Origin of Species, it has hundreds of apparently unrelated facts in it. But they're only apparently unrelated. He was the guy who put them all together and made a science. And science is about different people talking to each other. Look at the structure of DNA. Who worked that out? They weren't biologists, they were physicists. So I think breaking down those barriers is absolutely crucial to the progress of biology, physics, or anything else. One of the things which has really changed in the last decade or so, certainly in my science, genetics, and also in many other scientists, it's become a much drier subject. Genetics used to be very, very wet. Extremely wet, of course, when it came to looking at sex and pedigrees and that kind of stuff. But then lots and lots of complicated biochemistry and high-tech machines that go ping. But that's really begun to change now. A lot of the best geneticists spend all their time mining electronic databases. And what these databases can do is just simply mind-boggling. They can do in an instant what would have taken 10 years ago a year to do. So there's sort of become a common market of knowledge in genetics. And it's interesting, with the Human Genome Project now complete, there was an attempt to put a stop to that, to have people own parts of the knowledge and charge other people to use it. Well, fortunately, they didn't succeed. And I think that commonality of knowledge has become really inevitable with the growth of electronic communication. People may try and put barriers up, and people may try and sell tickets to this knowledge, but I think their day is over. I think public communication of science really isn't very different from any other kind of communication of science. If I look at the journal Nature, which I do every week, a good 2/3 of the papers in Nature I can't understand at all. A good half of them I can't understand the title of. And that's the true of any other science. So there are barriers within science itself, and journals like Nature or Science or the Public Libraries or the PLOS journals do a great deal to bring down those barriers among scientists. It doesn't take a great deal more to break those barriers down a bit more and bring them to the public. And I think what the public fails to realize about science is that it's interesting. It actually genuinely is really remarkably interesting once it's been explained. In many ways, science is actually an intrinsic part of the entertainment industry. Why not be entertained by science? And that's what I try to do. It's hard to be sure about the future of scientific communication, of any other kind of communication, except to note that, you know, the 21st century is the century of communication. I mean, that's what we're now telling people things, which often they don't like, or they're telling us things that we don't like. And I think that is bound to happen more and more in science. Science, in the end, is probably the most democratic activity of all, because any fool can do it. They may not do it well, I don't do it particularly well, but anybody can do it up to their own level of ability. Now any fool can tell people about it and communicate. And I think that's the future of science communication, which it's going to be a level playing field, it's going to be cheap, it's going to be more or less instant. And that really, all those things are totally new. If you go back 50 years, none of that was true. It's becoming true and will become much more so.